Imagine, like, just for a second, that you're walking down your street, you're heading to your favorite coffee shop on a typical Tuesday morning.
Right. Just a totally normal day.
Exactly. You pass your neighbors watering their lawns, you see the local crossing guard guiding kids, and you finally walk in and nod at the barista.
Mm-hmm.
You probably don't even think about it, but every single one of those seemingly mundane interactions is built on this invisible, incredibly complex structural foundation. It's the infrastructure of trust.
Yeah, it's massive.
You implicitly trust the driver in that, 2-ton metal box to stop at the red light. You trust the crossing guard to care about the kids. You trust the barista not to poison your latte.
Let's hope so. Yeah. I mean, it is the silent background hum of human civilization. But I want to pose a thought experiment to you, the listener, for this deep dive. What happens to a community or a city or even a family when that invisible infrastructure completely evaporates?
Oh, man, that is.
When the baseline unspoken rule of your daily life just shifts from a presumption of safety to, well, nobody trusts anyone. It's a terrifying concept to really sit with, honestly, because we rely on that invisible infrastructure far more than we rely on the physical concrete under our feet.
Yeah, for sure.
When that trust vanishes, you are suddenly looking at an environment where every single interaction, like buying food, walking down a hallway, or even speaking to a relative, becomes this high-stakes calculation of survival.
Just constantly doing the math.
Exactly. And the cognitive load of living like that, of constantly running that math, is staggering.
And that's the exact mission of our deep dive today. We've got this massive, wildly diverse stack of sources in front of us.
We really do. It's quite a mix.
We are pulling from geopolitical history, on-the-ground reports from real-world post-conflict zones, tabletop RPG rulebooks, YA thrillers, and even some indie music.
It's a fascinating cross-section.
It is. We're going to take this chaotic mix of information and see if we can uncover a unified theory of, well, zero-trust environments.
I love that framing.
Right. Like, how do humans actually adapt when the baseline rule is that the person standing right next to you might be a threat? Okay, let's unpack this.
Where should we begin?
I want to start by looking at a place where trust hasn't just naturally faded away over time, but where it has been actively obliterated by political reality.
Well, if you're looking for ground zero of that phenomenon, the sources point us straight to Luanda, Angola.
Okay, yeah.
This is a deeply sobering case study in how a society functions when the social contract is essentially just torn up.
Mm-hmm.
To understand Luanda, you have to look at the historical context.
Because it's been through a lot.
A tremendous amount. You're looking at a city and a nation that endured a grueling 30-year struggle for independence, which was immediately followed by a brutal, protracted civil war.
Decades of constant instability. I mean, that alone is going to leave massive scars on the collective psyche of the people there.
Precisely. And in the modern post-war era, the country's rapid economic transition has been managed largely by a really centralized group of technocratic elites.
Right.
So from the perspective of the average citizen just navigating the streets, the ruling class is perceived almost as this closed loop, a family of skilled deceivers who are basically hoarding the nation's wealth.
So they feel completely locked out.
Exactly. Because the state has historically either failed the populace or actively harmed them, public trust is completely dead. Sociologists actually call this vertical trust. So that's the trust looking upward from the citizen to the state, to the police, to the institutions.
Okay, vertical trust.
Yeah, and in Luanda, vertical trust basically does not exist.
I imagine that when you know the people at the top are looking out only for themselves, that cynicism just bleeds down into how you treat the person standing next to you on the sidewalk.
Oh, absolutely. It changes everything.
You see this viscerally in the sources when they describe the daily commute, specifically trying to catch a ride on a candonguero.
Ah, yeah, the candongueros. These are the informal blue and white passenger vans that essentially serve as the absolute backbone of public transit in Luanda.
Because the state infrastructure isn't there.
Right, because formal state infrastructure is so lacking.
Mm-hmm.
And the way our sources describe the process of boarding one of these vans is just incredibly revealing.
It sounds chaotic.
It is entirely governed by what locals literally call the law of shoving.
So it's definitely not like lining up for a bus in London, right?
Yeah.
There's no polite queuing going on.
Not even close. It is a frantic, hyper-competitive scramble. The sources detail how the fare collectors basically hang out the doors, shouting destinations at breakneck speed like Mutamba, Mutamba, airport, airport.
Oh.
Yeah, all while the vans blast extremely loud Kuduro music. There's actually a specific detail in the research about tracks by the artist Dog Murray's playing constantly.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and his lyrics explicitly point out that while the war might be over, the daily struggle continues. So in that intensely loud, competitive environment, no one defers to anyone.
So it's just every person for themselves.
Completely. The vulnerable, like the elderly, pregnant women, the disabled, are just completely disregarded in the physical rush to secure a seat.
Because if you pause to be polite, you lose your seat. And if you lose your seat, you miss your shift. And you don't feed your family.
Exactly.
The environment literally punishes politeness.
It demands aggression. What's fascinating here is the psychological adaptation to that. Because there is no civic order protecting them, the citizens have developed this culture of mock aggression.
Mock aggression, like fake fights.
Sort of. To survive the daily commute, people routinely trade these hyperbolic theatrical threats of physical violence.
Wait, really?
Yeah, you'll hear people yelling things like, "I'll beat you, I'll kill you," over a bumped shoulder. But it rarely escalates to actual murder. It's a defensive posture.
Oh, I see. It's like puffing out your chest.
Exactly. It's a way of setting boundaries in a totally lawless space. When you are in a tense city where resources are basically only for the strong, you project strength, even exaggerated theatrical strength, just to keep predators at bay.
So everyone is just walking around in a suit of invisible armor covered in spikes.
That's a great way to put it.
But here's where it gets really interesting for me. The city still functions. Millions of people live there. If absolutely everyone is treating everyone else like a threat, society should just grind to a halt.
It seems like a paradox, doesn't it?
It really does. It's like, imagine you're on a sinking ship.
Okay.
You absolutely despise the captain steering the ship, and you assume all the officers handing out life vests are corrupt and just keeping the best ones for themselves.
Right. Zero vertical trust.
Exactly. But you have no choice but to implicitly trust the stranger next to you holding a bucket. Because if they stop bailing water, you both drown.
That is a phenomenal analogy. It perfectly illustrates the mechanism of horizontal trust.
Horizontal trust. Okay.
Yes, vertical trust, trusting the captain, is dead. But horizontal trust, which is this hyperlocal, desperate, peer-to-peer cooperation, becomes an absolute necessity for survival.
Where do we see that playing out in Luanda?
The sources highlight this dynamic deep inside Luanda's mosaics, which are the sprawling, informal slum neighborhoods.
So outside the Musics, on the main roads, it's the law of shoving. But inside?
Inside, the dynamic flips entirely.
Really?
Yeah. The broader city might be this zero-trust zone of theatrical aggression, but inside the Musics, the residents form these intense, tightly knit, almost cellular networks of cooperation.
Just to survive the day-to-day.
They have to. The state isn't providing running water or reliable electricity. So neighbors literally patch together intricate shared water pipes.
Oh, wow, they build their own utilities.
Exactly. They string up dangerous, improvised electrical bypasses together. They share childcare. They establish informal neighborhood watches to defend their streets. They bypass the negligent state entirely.
That's incredible.
The mechanism here is mutual vulnerability. You trust your neighbor not because you inherently like them, but because your survival is inextricably linked to theirs.
So the total collapse of vertical trust actually forces a hyperdense form of horizontal trust.
Yes, exactly.
But what happens if the situation is so volatile that even that horizontal trust can't take root?
That is the crucial next question.
Right, because if we look at the data from Mogadishu, Somalia, around 2006, the sources give us a strictly mechanical view of how trust can wildly fluctuate in an urban conflict zone.
It's a very different picture.
Yeah, just looking at the historical timeline, we see a totally different dynamic than Angola.
Mogadishu provides a really profound lesson in the mechanics of civic trust. By 2006, the city had endured over 15 years of complete statelessness.
15 years. That's a lifetime.
It is. The central government had collapsed back in 1991, which led to a massive power vacuum filled by rival warlords and fractured clan militias.
And in that environment, I'm guessing horizontal trust is basically impossible.
Incredibly difficult. Even the horizontal trust we saw in Luanda couldn't hold up because the clan divisions were so deep and the violence was so pervasive.
Right.
Your neighbor wasn't just someone bailing water with you. Your neighbor might belong to a rival militia that is actively shelling your street.
Total fragmentation. So how does a society even begin to rebuild a baseline of trust from that absolute 0 point?
Well, the historical data shows a fascinating swing. In 2006, a coalition known as the Islamic Courts Union, or ICU, rose to power.
Okay, the ICU.
Yes. And they actually managed to bring about 6 months of unprecedented widespread stability to the capital and much of southern Somalia.
Wait, 6 months of stability after 15 years of chaos?
Yeah. Roadblocks were dismantled, the airport and seaport finally reopened, and people could actually walk the streets at night.
But how? Because unifying a city that has been violently fractured by clan warfare for a decade and a half seems mathematically impossible. What was the mechanism they used to bridge those divides?
So before we dive into this, it's really important to state that we are not endorsing any political or religious factions here. We are impartially analyzing the sources to understand the mechanics of trust.
Right, exactly. We're just looking at what happens structurally.
Exactly. So what the ICU did was utilize religion as a shared ledger of trust.
A shared ledger. I like that term.
Because Somalia is a predominantly Sunni Muslim country, in the absence of a secular constitution or a functioning judicial system, the ICU used traditional Islamic law Sharia to provide a semblance of order.
And that transcended the clan line.
Precisely. Clan law is inherently biased, right? It always favors your own family. But religious law, theoretically, applies equally to everyone. It provided a neutral framework.
Oh, that makes sense. It's an external set of rules everyone can agree on.
And the local population was so utterly exhausted by the chronic insecurity that they began to legitimize the ICU.
Just out of pure desperation for some order.
Yes. Even secular business leaders, who had previously funded their own private militias for protection, began backing the ICU simply because it stabilized the markets.
Wow.
Trust, in this brief window, was built entirely on the desperate desire for predictability.
I would assume that once a city tastes that kind of stability after 15 years of chaos, the international community would rush in to support it and cement that vertical trust, right?
You'd think so, but geopolitics rarely operates on local sentiment. The sources detail how the transitional federal government, the TFG, which was internationally recognized but incredibly weak locally, feared the ICU's rapid expansion.
Okay, so the official government gets nervous.
Right. And concurrently, the international community, particularly the United States, was deeply concerned by the presence of hardline factions within the ICU.
Because they were worried about terrorism.
Exactly. They feared the establishment of a Taliban-style regime or a safe haven for terrorism. Again, we aren't taking sides here, just reporting the competing priorities outlined in the sources.
Right. So conflicting priorities. The locals want immediate physical safety, but the international actors are looking at long-term geopolitical risk.
Precisely. And this clash of priorities led to a massive military intervention.
What happened?
In late 2006, Ethiopian forces, backing the TFG and supported by the U.S., launched an offensive that swiftly ousted the ICU from Mogadishu.
And mechanically, what did that do to the infrastructure of trust on the ground for the average citizen?
It completely obliterated it. The intervention plunged the city right back into chronic violence.
Oh man, back to square one.
Worse, in some ways. Insurgency attacks spiked, the warlords returned, checkpoints went back up, and the violence escalated to levels unseen in years.
So that tiny window of trust was just slammed shut.
Completely. From the perspective of the citizens, whatever vertical trust might have been building was atomized. Our sources note a prevailing sentiment from that era, and I quote, "Nobody trusts the government, even an inch."
I mean, you can't blame them.
Not at all. When a population feels that a state, especially one propped up by foreign military power, cannot provide basic security, and in fact dismantle the only security they had known in 15 years, the trust deficit becomes chronic.
It just breeds total cynicism.
It creates a deeply ingrained cynicism toward any institution claiming to offer stability.
It's a tragic cycle. You basically learn that hoping for stability only leads to a harder fall.
Unfortunately, yes.
But, both Luanda and Mogadishu are loud, visceral examples. The lack of trust is obvious. It's right there in the streets. But a zero-trust environment isn't always loud, is it?
No, not at all.
Sometimes it's completely silent.
Yeah.
What if the state isn't absent, but hyper-present and actually uses trust as a weapon? This brings us to Uzbekistan.
Yes, and specifically the aftermath of the 2005 Andijan massacre.
Yeah.
This completely flips the dynamic we've been discussing.
Let's set the stage. What happened in Andijan?
In Andijan, security forces fired directly into a crowd of protesters. It was brutal.
And the numbers are staggering.
They really are. Human rights estimates suggest anywhere from a few hundred to up to 1,500 people were killed.
Just horrifying.
And Following that trauma, we see how autocracies effectively weaponize paranoia to control populations. And not just domestically, but globally.
Right, because our sources follow the survivors of that massacre. Many of them obviously fled as refugees.
Understandably.
And some ended up thousands of miles away in Kalmar, Sweden. Now, if you are a listener imagining Kalmar, you're picturing a picturesque, quiet, democratic European town.
Complete safety, basically.
Exactly. You would assume that being physically removed from the autocratic regime, these refugees would take a deep breath, let their guard down, and finally trust their environment.
But the data shows the exact opposite.
Really?
Yes. The reports indicate these refugees are absolutely terrified to speak out. They are terrified to give interviews to journalists. In some cases, they are terrified to even speak candidly to each other.
That is wild.
Imagine the psychological weight of that. You're sitting in a charming Swedish cafe, drinking coffee, and constantly looking over your shoulder to see if the person at the next table is eavesdropping.
They are in a free country, but their minds are still trapped in the autocracy. Why? Is it just residual trauma?
It's trauma, but it's also a highly rational response to what human rights watchdogs call extraterritorial repression.
Extraterritorial repression, meaning the state reaches beyond its borders.
Exactly. The fear isn't abstract at all. It's based on actual, targeted violence against exiled critics. The sources cite some really chilling examples.
What kind of examples?
Well, in 2012, a prominent exiled Uzbek cleric, Obidkan Kori-Nazarov, was shot multiple times in the stairwell of his own apartment building in Sweden.
In Sweden?
Yes. And 2 years later, in 2014, another imam, Abdullah Bukhari, was assassinated in Istanbul. Again, we are strictly detailing the findings from human rights reports here, maintaining our neutral stance.
Of course. But wow, so the threat is entirely real. The regime is reaching across borders.
Exactly. The autocratic regime successfully exported its zero-trust environment across the globe without launching a military campaign.
They bypassed the physical borders of Europe and got directly inside the refugees' heads.
That's the perfect way to phrase it. The psychological mechanism here is profound. If you are afraid to speak to your neighbor in a free, democratic country because you calculate that an undercover agent might shoot you in your stairwell,
your whole reality is broken.
Yes, the architecture of your reality is built on absolute distrust. The regime doesn't need to post a guard outside your house if they can install a guard inside your mind.
So what does this all mean for our unified theory?
It's a huge piece of the puzzle.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it tells us that political forces can systematically destroy trust, but that destruction isn't just a political phenomenon. It shapes how humans interact with physical space.
Absolutely.
Which leads us perfectly into the second lens of our deep dive, the literal physical geography of trust.
This is where things get really fascinating.
Can the actual shape of a building or a city dictate whether a community bonds or fractures?
The environment itself is a massive, often overlooked variable. We usually think of trust as a purely social construct, right?
Yeah, like it's just about relationships.
But physical space forces behavioral adaptations. And the most extreme, undeniable example of this in our stack of sources is the town of Whittier, Alaska.
Whittier is a geographical anomaly. It feels like something straight out of a science fiction novel.
Yeah, it really does.
It was originally born from a World War II military base. But today, almost the entire population of the town lives inside a single 14-story concrete building called the Begich Towers.
It is incredibly rare to see civic infrastructure consolidated to this degree. You essentially have a whole town contained within a single envelope.
A whole town?
Yeah. The police station, the post office, the grocery store, the medical clinic, even a church and a bed and breakfast, all located on the first few floors of this massive high-rise.
That is so wild to picture.
And the isolation isn't just vertical, it's regional. To even get into the town by land, you have to drive through a 2.5-mile single-lane tunnel bored straight through a mountain.
And here's the kicker for the listener. You share that tunnel with a train.
Right.
You literally have to wait your turn, going one direction at a time on a strict schedule. It is the absolute definition of isolated.
It really is.
The sources paint such a vivid picture of life there. The kids don't even go outside to get to school.
No, they don't have to.
There's an underground tunnel connecting the towers to the school building so they can completely avoid the brutal Alaskan winter.
Which is very practical.
People keep binoculars by their windows to watch reindeer out on the ice. It sounds weirdly cozy, but I have to push back here.
Okay, let's hear it.
Human nature is messy. If you trap hundreds of people in a single building during a brutal, dark winter where it snows like 22 feet a year,
That's a lot of snow.
wouldn't they eventually get severe cabin fever? Wouldn't the interpersonal friction cause them to eventually turn on each other?
It's a fair question.
Right. Why does extreme spatial compression create trust in Alaska, but extreme density in a place like New York City creates a culture of defensive superficiality?
That is the crucial distinction. This raises an important question about the difference between what we can call shared stakes versus transactional passing.
Shared stakes, okay.
Whittier operates on a model of forced cohesion. Because social isolation is structurally impossible in big towers, the community must rely on each other.
You just can't get away from them.
You literally cannot avoid your neighbors. You share the hallways, the elevators, the single heating system. If the boiler breaks in the dead of winter, everyone in town freezes.
So the stakes are shared survival against a hostile, extreme natural environment.
Exactly. That shared vulnerability forces mutual reliance. You might not like the guy down the hall, but you have a vested interest in him maintaining his plumbing because a leak in his apartment floods yours.
Oh, that makes total sense. You're literally all in the same boat.
Building, in this case, but yes.
Mm-hmm.
And when the massive 1964 Good Friday earthquake and tsunami hit...
Right, I read about that.
Which, by the way, remains one of the largest seismic events in recorded history.
Huge disaster.
The town's heavily consolidated shared infrastructure allowed them to mobilize, survive, and rebuild collectively. And we saw the exact same mechanism activate decades later, in 2020, during the COVID pandemic.
Right. Because of that single tunnel, they had total control over their geography.
They utilized their geographic bottleneck to seal themselves off.
Right.
When the virus eventually breached the town via temporary waterfront workers, the community successfully isolated the infected individuals within the building.
They just locked it down.
And they prevented a massive town-wide outbreak. They could do that because their spatial containment makes mutual reliance and rapid communication highly effective.
They had no choice but to trust the protocols they agreed upon, because the physical space offered no escape.
Precisely.
Okay, so that's forced cohesion. Trust forged by the absolute necessity of shared space and harsh elements. But our sources also highlight the exact opposite end of the spectrum.
Yes, pure spatial nihilism.
A place where trust can't exist because there's simply nothing to attach it to. Welcome to Nothing, Arizona.
And Nothing, Arizona is a fascinating counterpoint. It's an actual ghost town founded in 1977.
And at its absolute peak, it boasted a population of 4 people.
4 people, it's amazing.
4. And it featured this deeply cynical, almost philosophical welcome sign that basically celebrated its own uselessness.
I love that sign.
The sign read, "The staunch citizens of Nothing are full of hope, faith, and believe in the work ethic." Through the years, these dedicated people had faith in nothing, hoped for nothing, worked at nothing, for nothing.
It's humorous, yes, but analytically, nothing represents a critical failure of spatial purpose.
What do you mean by that?
It is an environment where trust cannot even take root because there is no functional ecological, geographic, or economic driver.
There's just no reason to be there.
Exactly. Without resources to manage, without a reason to collaborate to survive, there is no foundation for a community to build upon. Today, it is completely abandoned.
The gas station just collapsed.
Right. It is the geographic embodiment of a void. Trust requires friction, interaction, and shared purpose. Nothing had none of those.
Which perfectly sets up the paradox of a massive metropolis like New York City.
Yes, the ultimate metropolis.
New York has endless friction, endless interaction, and massive economic drivers. But our sources note that in these high-density global cities, a unique zero-trust dynamic emerges.
It's a very different flavor of zero trust.
It doesn't come from the danger of a war zone or the isolation of a mountain tunnel, but from overwhelming scale. You're constantly surrounded by millions of people, yet you feel entirely alone.
Yes, that is the concept of transactional passing I mentioned earlier.
How does that work, mechanically?
Well, the mechanics of trust in a hyperdense city are governed by cognitive exhaustion. It's not that people in New York are inherently malicious or cruel.
Right.
It's that residents simply lack the cognitive bandwidth to invest in deep social verification with every single stranger they pass on the street or sit next to on the subway.
Because if you stop to emotionally invest in every interaction, you would never make it to work. Your brain would just short circuit.
Exactly. So defensive superficiality becomes a necessary, highly rational survival tool.
You put up a psychological shield.
You have to. Outsource your trust to the system like you trust the subway operator to drive the train, you trust the traffic lights to regulate the cars. But interpersonal, horizontal trust is heavily gated.
You keep your head down, you avoid eye contact, and you just move.
The density is so extreme that anonymity becomes your primary defense mechanism.
So we've moved from physical walls, like the walls of an Alaskan tower or the grid of a city, to the invisible walls of human psychology.
Right.
But what happens when we look at institutions where the walls are made of rules?
This is a great pivot.
What happens when a lack of trust isn't a tragic byproduct of war or a symptom of urban exhaustion, but the actual intentional operating system of the institution?
Now we are entering the architecture of betrayal.
The architecture of betrayal. Sounds like a movie title.
It does. And there's really no better lens to examine this through than espionage, intelligence networks, and clandestine organizations.
We have some incredible fiction and film sources here to ground this concept. We dive into William Boyd's novel Restless, which is set in 1939.
A classic spy setup.
Yeah, it follows a young Russian spy named Eva Delektorskaya and her brilliant, enigmatic spy master, Lucas Romer. And we also have Steven Soderbergh's 2025 film Black Bag, starring Michael Fassbender and Cate Blanchett.
In both of these narratives, we see how institutions actively professionalize betrayal.
Professionalize it.
Yes.
Yeah.
In the world of Restless, the baseline rule is absolute paranoia. Eva literally shares a bed with Romer, yet she fundamentally distrusts him.
That sounds exhausting.
The psychological burden on her character is immense because every conversation, every intimate moment is just a chess match.
She has to assume he's playing her.
She knows he is perfectly capable of manipulating her for tactical gain, perhaps to plant disinformation, or even sacrifice her for a larger operation.
The institution strips away the very concept of safety.
Exactly.
And in Black Bag, the premise revolves around a married intelligence couple where one is suspected of leaking secrets. The movie takes the most sacred bastion of horizontal trust, a marriage, and entirely weaponizes it.
It subverts the whole concept.
A marriage isn't a bond of absolute trust anymore. It's just another cover identity. It's a vulnerability to be managed.
That's the core paradox of espionage. The institution demands ultimate loyalty to the state, but to achieve that, it requires its agents to completely hollow out their personal loyalties.
What I found hilarious in the sources were the reviews of Black Bag.
Oh, the reviews were brutal.
Audiences were actively rolling their eyes at these supposed super spies. One reviewer specifically mocked a scene featuring a super obvious pistol on the table trick that the characters actually fell for.
Right. The audience expected more.
It really highlights how, in pop culture, we expect these architects of paranoia to be infinitely clever, like 5 steps ahead of everyone else. Yet the reviewers were so frustrated when the characters fell prey to basic human manipulation.
It's an interesting critique because it exposes the gap between the myth of the infallible spy and the reality of human fallibility.
Yeah, we want them to be robots, but they're still human.
But when we move from Hollywood fiction to real-world institutional paranoia, it is far less glamorous and honestly far more exhausting. Consider the decentralized hacktivist collective, Anonymous.
Now, this is a fascinating modern parallel.
It really is.
In Anonymous, there is no central leadership. There's no spy master like Lucas Romer pulling the strings. It's a purely digital collective.
Completely decentralized.
And because they are constantly engaging in illegal or highly disruptive digital acts against governments and corporations, they operate under constant suffocating anxiety of state infiltration.
They essentially translate the espionage paranoia into a decentralized digital space.
How so?
Because anonymity is the core tenet of the group, verification is impossible. The very mechanism that protects them from the FBI total anonymity is the exact same mechanism that destroys their internal trust.
Because you never know who you're really chatting with.
Exactly. Members are constantly accusing each other of being undercover feds. If an operation goes wrong, or if someone suggests a target that seems a little too risky, the immediate assumption is infiltration.
They cannot trust each other's digital avatars.
No, they can't.
And our sources point out a really strange byproduct of this. Hackers in these zero-trust environments will often only trust external journalists. Why is that? Why trust the media over your own collective?
It seems counterintuitive, right?
Totally.
But it's because a journalist has a public identity and predictable professional incentives.
Oh, interesting.
In an ecosystem where everyone is masked, where motives are obscured, and where anyone could literally be an FBI agent trying to flip you, The only reliable actor is the one whose identity is verified.
And their motives are clear.
Right. Their motive, getting a good story, is entirely public. The journalist becomes a strange kind of trusted third party simply because they aren't playing the anonymity game.
I love that. Here's where it gets really interesting for you, the listener. Think of these institutions like an endless game of Among Us or Mafia.
That's a perfect comparison.
The rules of the game literally require you to assume the person sitting right next to you is the imposter. If you trust easily, you lose the game.
The institution is built to reward paranoia and punish vulnerability.
And we must recognize that this institutional paranoia isn't strictly confined to international spies or hacker collectives, right?
Not at all. The architecture of betrayal can easily trickle down into micro-communities and even the family unit.
We see this played out vividly in the YA thrillers in our stack.
Yes, the YA fiction provides a great microcosm for this.
In Killing November, you have a lethal hidden boarding school where the curriculum is practically based on betrayal and assassination.
High-stakes high school.
Exactly. And in The Sea Keeps by Sarah Ahirs, you have the cursed island of New Amity. The islanders harbor deep, historical, dark secrets.
And when something goes wrong,
when a murder happens, they immediately blame the marginalized summer boys because the entire institution of the town is built on this historical distrust of outsiders.
it's systemic scapegoating. But perhaps the most relatable and chilling extrapolation is found in the novel Collision Course by Maggie Tom.
Oh, this one is rough.
The narrative shifts away from spies and curses and centers entirely on a family business, JD Insurance.
A normal insurance company.
Right, but it's being destroyed from the inside by insurance fraud, embezzlement, and blackmail.
The protagonist, Danny, realizes someone is actively trying to kill her. Her mom has suddenly quit the business, her dad is desperate for money, and all the evidence points to an inside job.
She literally doesn't know who to trust at her own dinner table.
Which is terrifying.
It is. And it perfectly illustrates the mechanics of how financial crimes can instantly turn a household into a zero-trust environment.
The family unit, which is traditionally the ultimate foundational bastion of horizontal trust,
completely hollowed out by the institutional logic of fraud and self-preservation. It proves that you don't need to be recruited by an intelligence agency to experience the architecture of betrayal.
It can manifest right in your own living room the moment conflicting high-stakes incentives are introduced.
Precisely.
Okay, so take a deep breath. We've looked at the desperate post-conflict survival of Luanda. We've examined the spatial density and cognitive exhaustion of New York City. We've dissected the professionalized paranoia of a spy agency and a hacker collective.
We've covered a lot of ground.
What happens if we take all three of those distinct environments, put them in a blender, and project them 50 years into the future?
You arrive at the concept of speculative urbanism.
Speculative urbanism. Let's get into it.
Specifically, our sources point us to the intricately detailed world of the cyberpunk tabletop RPGs and the massive video game Cyberpunk 2077.
Welcome to Night City.
Exactly.
The setting here is the 2040s, known in the deep lore of the game as the Time of the Red.
It's a very bleak era.
Yeah, the world is attempting to rebuild from devastating corporate wars. The sky literally has a red hue from orbital strikes and massive particulate pollution.
The environment itself is hostile.
And the global supply chain, the thing that brings us our morning coffee today, is completely fractured. You have mega corporations acting like sovereign nations and a total terrifying absence of any central regulatory authority.
The geopolitical landscape of this speculative future is highly fragmented, which sets the stage for the micro-interactions on the ground.
Let's look at that map.
According to the lore, the Eurozone has managed to remain somewhat stable, maintaining a globally accepted currency.
Okay, good for them.
The Neosovs control a massive landmass, relying heavily on the physical infrastructure of the Trans-Siberian Railroad just to maintain logistics.
And what about Japan?
Japan is busy internally purging the influence of the massive Arasaka megacorporation while concurrently constructing massive floating drift cities on the ocean.
That sounds incredible. And the U.S.?
Meanwhile, the NUSA, the new United States, is violently fractured. They are clinging desperately to crucial resources like the Panama Canal just to remain relevant.
It's a world where the macro infrastructure of civilization has been blown to pieces.
It really has.
And there is a defining quote from the RPG sourcebook for this era that I think sums up the entirety of our deep dive today.
Oh, I know the one.
It's from a character named Danica the Tundra McDouglas. She perfectly encapsulates the vibe. She says, "Everybody needs everybody else. and nobody trusts anyone.
That quote is essentially the thesis statement for what we can call the transactional ecology of Night City.
Transactional ecology.
Because traditional supply chains, central governments, and social safety nets are wrecked, sheer survival is completely dependent on a hyper-interdependent ecosystem of highly specialized freelancers.
Let's break down the mechanics of that ecosystem because it's fascinating how it replaces normal society.
It's a very rigid hierarchy.
You have the corporate execs who run the boardrooms and have the capital. They pay solos, which are basically heavily cybernetically enhanced mercenaries.
The muscle.
And netrunners, who are the elite hackers, to physically or digitally wipe out the competition.
Right.
But those solos inevitably get shot up, so you have medtechs and techs who exist solely to patch their biological bodies and repair their cybernetic weapons.
They keep the war machine running.
Then you have fixers, who act as the ultimate middlemen sourcing black market goods. Those goods are physically transported across the dangerous wastelands by nomads who run heavily armed convoy caravans.
And someone has to report on all of this.
Right. Finally, you have the medias and walker boys who document the chaos, uncover the corporate lies, and shape the underground culture.
It's a perfectly balanced, utterly ruthless food chain.
It really is.
But notice the stark difference here compared to our real-world examples.
What do you mean?
Unlike the Musiques of Luanda, where people rely on shared humanity and deep neighborly bonds to survive the state's neglect.
Right, the horizontal trust.
Night City relies purely on shared expedience.
Oh, I see.
Let's look at the medtech example you brought up. You don't trust a medtech because they took a Hippocratic oath or because you share a community center.
No, it's definitely not.
You trust the medtech to stitch you up solely because you're transferring digital currency to their account.
It's purely financial. But, and this is the zero trust mechanic in action, you simultaneously assume that if you happen to die on their operating table, they will immediately harvest your expensive cyberware and sell it to a fixer.
Oh, wow.
The entire society functions smoothly, but it functions on the baseline assumption of mutual optimal exploitation.
Which brings up the core storyline of V, the protagonist in the Cyberpunk 2077 video game.
V is a perfect case study for this.
V is a mercenary navigating this exact ecosystem. And D's entire narrative isn't about saving the world. It's a desperate, highly personal fight for individual survival.
Well, it's very intimate in its stakes.
Right. V is dealing with a piece of rogue technology literally killing them from the inside out, while simultaneously trying to navigate the betrayals of mega corporations and massive godlike AI threats like the mysterious Mr. Blue Eyes.
Just trying to stay alive one more day.
But here is my pushback to this whole speculative vision.
Let's hear it. If the entire world is this massive dystopian chess match between global superpowers, multi-trillion-dollar corporations, and rogue AIs, does the story of one single mercenary like V even matter?
That's a profound question.
Or is pop culture telling us that in a zero-trust world, the only narrative that can possibly exist is the selfish, cynical fight for individual survival?
That question really cuts to the core philosophical tension of the entire cyberpunk genre, and it connects directly to other speculative works in our sources, like the 1985 cult film Future Kill.
Oh yeah, where naive outsiders are violently hunted in a city sector that fundamentally rejects them.
Exactly. Speculative urbanism isn't just entertainment, it serves as a stark warning.
A warning about what?
It suggests that technology, contrary to the utopianism often pushed by Silicon Valley, does not inherently build trust.
Right.
In fact, if left unregulated by strong civic institutions, technology simply optimizes our ability to exploit one another at scale.
It just makes us better at using each other.
Precisely. V's story matters profoundly because it acts as a stress test for human nature. The game is constantly asking the player, can a human being retain their humanity?
Can they build genuine, non-transactional relationships?
Yes, when the entire socioeconomic system is actively, algorithmically incentivizing betrayal, can you still choose to trust?
That is heavy.
It is.
So we've gone on quite a journey. From the crowded streets of Angola to the snowed-in tunnels of Alaska, through the chat rooms of hacker collectives, all the way to the neon-lit, hyper-exploitative streets of a fictional 2077.
We've seen it from every angle.
But I want to zoom all the way in for our final lens.
Okay, let's zoom in.
Down to the deeply personal, psychological level, what does living in these zero-trust environments actually do to the human mind over the long term?
It creates a profound, Largely invisible trauma.
Invisible trauma.
It alters the cognitive baseline of how an individual processes and interacts with reality. You basically stop seeing opportunities for connection and only see vectors of threat.
Our final source brings this psychological reality home beautifully. It's an analysis of the indie rock band Chastity Belt, specifically focusing on their album Time to Go Home.
Such an interesting pivot to music here.
There's a lyric on the track, The Thing, that screams out a very specific line. No one trusts anyone, everyone's infected.
That exact phrase, everyone's infected, is the perfect framework to understand the psychological toll.
How so?
Trust deficits operate exactly like a societal infection. It's not a biological pathogen, of course. It's an ideological one.
Walk me through the mechanics of that. How does an idea actually infect a population?
Think about the environments we've discussed. When an individual lives in an environment where survival literally requires exploiting or outmaneuvering others.
Like aggressively shoving your way onto a Kandangaro in Luanda.
Exactly. Or navigating a lethal corporate hit in Night City. Or even trying to avoid being framed for embezzlement by your own family in collision course. In all those cases, you are forced to internalize the hostile logic of that environment. You adopt paranoia, not because you are crazy, but as a highly rational defense mechanism.
You have to survive.
But in doing so, you become a carrier of the disease.
Oh, wow.
You begin to treat innocent others with the same cynical calculation that you fear they will use against you. The victim of a zero-trust environment inevitably perpetuates it.
It reminds me of the townspeople in the YA novel The Sea Keeps.
Yes, perfect example.
The people of New Amity are so deeply infected by the historical paranoia of their island that when a murder happens, they instantly, almost reflexively, blame the marginalized summer boys.
They don't even hesitate.
They don't want to do the hard, complex work of systemic justice or look inward at their own community's flaws. The infection of distrust is just easier to embrace.
It feels safer to rapidly blame the outsider than to trust a fragile, unpredictable judicial process.
Exactly.
The infection provides a false sense of security through cynicism. And this leads to the ultimate conclusion about the collapse of societies.
What's that?
A city or a society doesn't permanently collapse when its physical infrastructure falls. Buildings can be rebuilt. Infrastructure can be repaired. We saw that in Whittier, Alaska, after the massive earthquake.
Right, they rebuilt the town.
A society collapses when the psychological exhaustion of living in a state of permanent defensive posture makes its citizens question what they are even fighting to preserve.
Yeah, you just don't care anymore.
When the cognitive fatigue of constant suspicion outweighs the fundamental human desire for community, the city dies from the inside out. The invisible infrastructure fully evaporates.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? We've gone on a massive winding journey today.
We really have.
We started in the crowded, chaotic, dusty commutes of Angola, where survival means shouting down your neighbor but secretly relying on them in the slums.
We traveled through the single-building, snowed-in town of Whittier, Alaska, where harsh geography forces a beautiful, necessary cohesion.
We looked at the calculated, professionalized paranoia of spy networks, hacker collectives, and families destroying themselves over insurance fraud. And we took a neon-drenched ride into the transactional, ruthless ecology of Night City.
The through line connecting all of these disparate sources is adaptation.
Humans just keep adapting.
Humans are incredibly, sometimes terrifyingly resilient. When the invisible infrastructure of trust collapses, we don't just give up. We build new, often much harsher structures to survive.
We build the law of shoving, we build transactional passing, we build cybernetic mercenary economies.
But that survival comes at a steep, often permanent psychological cost.
You might be listening to this and thinking, well, this is fascinating, but I'm not fleeing a corporate hit squad, I don't live in a post-conflict zone, and I don't share a single building with my entire town.
Right, it feels far removed.
But the truth is, you navigate micro-environments of trust every single day. The subtle office politics at your job, the neighborhood associations and HOAs, the unspoken family dynamics during a tense holiday dinner.
It's everywhere.
Trust isn't a static given. It is a fragile, daily negotiation that you're actively participating in.
And that leaves us with a final, lingering question to mull over as we conclude today.
Let's hear it.
We live in an increasingly digital world that is governed by what cybersecurity experts literally call zero-trust architecture.
Oh, I've heard that term.
That's not a metaphor. It's an actual industry standard. It means building computer networks and security systems designed to assume that every single user, every device, and every login attempt is a potential threat until proven otherwise.
The system assumes the worst.
As we spend more and more of our waking lives living, working, and communicating inside these digital institutions, ask yourself, is this algorithmic paranoia slowly acting as an infection on your real-world biological relationships?
Are you subconsciously bringing the logic of a zero-trust network into your own home? Are you treating your neighbor like an unverified login attempt? Think about that the next time you walk down the street and not at the barista. Are you actively building up the invisible infrastructure, or are you letting it slowly evaporate? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a truly wild ride.
It really has, and we can't wait to explore the next rabbit hole with you.
Yeah.
Until then, take care of yourselves and maybe, just maybe, trust your neighbors a little bit more. Bye.